This podcast contains spoilers, explicit language, and is not made for anyone under the age of 13. Listener discretion is advised. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to John vs. Film. And today we're taking a look at 1967's Daikaiju Kuchusen, Gamera Tai Gyaos, or also known as Gamera vs. Gyaos. The film was directed by Noriaki Yuasa, who did both the human storyline as well as the special effects. So he's both, the special effects director and the movie director. And is also written by Nissan Takahashi, who we've seen through the previous two movies and who we'll see as the credits going forward. If I checked last time. So yes, we're in the third installment of the Gamera franchise, and this one holds a dear place in my heart because when I was like a little kid, when I mean like little, I was like 4, 5, like very little. It was before I was even in elementary school, really, or was just starting it. It's like somewhere between the two. Well, anyway, for those for anyone listening who is in the Gen Z generation, there used to be this place, like these places where you could rent movies, rent physical media specifically. And you might have heard of the Blockbuster video. Well, when I was a kid, I went to this place called Hollywood Video. That's where I went to rent movies, or my family did, because again, I was 4 years old at the time, so it's not like I could drive myself to the store or the rental place to get movies myself. But when I was that little, I couple like two of the movies that I would rent all the time were Gamera movies. This was one of them, Gamera versus Gyaos. So I used to rent this a lot of the time. And there were other movies I used to rent all the time, like some Godzilla movies my family didn't own. And that was pretty much just Godzilla vs. Hedorah or Godzilla vs. Smog Monster. And there was Transformers the movie, Digimon the movie. I kind of stick with kind of the same stuff, but regardless, this was definitely one of the movies I would rent all the time. The other Gamera movie I would rent all the time was Gamera versus Zigra. I think those were like the two Gamera movies available at our Hollywood Video for VHS. And I also owned one VHS movie of Gamera, but I'll get to it when later on because that one holds even more dear place in my heart. But yeah, anyway, I have very fond nostalgic memories of this movies. But before we begin, let's do a quick rundown of what John versus Film, or how John versus Film is broken up. So it's, I first talk about synopsis of the movie, give you a little brief comedic synopsis, and then I talk about 5 things I like about the movie. Then I go into 5 things I dislike or criticize about the movie, and I wrap it all up with an overall thoughts. So, you got that? Well, I hope so, because we're about to begin with the synopsis of Gamera vs. Gyaos. So, here we go. A volcano in Japan erupts, which attracts our fire-loving turtle Gamera, and awakens the vampire kaiju Gyaos from his 1,000-year-old nap. While Gamera seems no longer interested in attacking human civilization, the same can't be said about Gyaos, as he finds humans to be a very tasty snack, especially after, again, that 1,000-year-old nap. The two monsters will collide in the third entry of the series. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's Gamera versus Gyaos. Good versus evil. Well, Gamera hasn't fully established his good side persona, because the last two movies, especially the first one, Gamera was more the villain. And the second one, he was a bad guy at the start, but then he decided to fight Barugan. And this one, yeah, he this is his transition to being a hero as he fights someone that actively harms humanity. Like, you can say what Gamera did was bad, but Gamera didn't really eat humans. But Gyaos, he does eat humans, so Gyaos is worse. Gyaos is definitely worse. So we're gonna go. So yeah, I gotta stop saying so yeah all the time. But we're gonna talk about the five things I like, and we're gonna start off with the human cast and story. I really like how the drama isn't black and white and it addresses issues of the time. Again, like the previous two movies, I watched August Ragoni's introduction or, of the movie before watching it. And apparently, during the time, there was, volcanoes, being active. And also during the time, there was protests, happening in Japan where, so like Japan during 1967 was establishing an expressway, a highway, or whatever you want to call it. But apparently there was a lot of protests and vandalisms from farmers who did not want the expressway to go through, or they didn't want to sell their land for the expressway to move forward. So yeah, the movie does tackle that issue. Um, but what I mean about the drama, or at least it's not so black and white where it's like, oh, it's the evil corporation, or oh, the evil farmers. There is sort of a, you know, uh, the company that's trying to make the expressway, they are still a very corporate, entity doing it for profits and stuff and for other investors. However, for the like for the company, it's not the companies themselves that are going to the farmers. It has to be the construction workers themselves who have to go and deal with the farmers. They have to do the work. You know, at the end of the day, you know, they're just doing a job. They have no choice. It's either that or not have any money for food. Like, they need to eat. And the foreman of these construction workers is played by Kojiro Hongo, which we remember from the previous movie, Gamera vs. Barugan. However, for the farmers' side who are protesting and even get to the point of vandalism, for the construction workers, who again, they're just doing the job. They seem to, like, at the beginning be like, oh, we don't want to sell our land, but it turns out the reason why they're doing it is that these farmers want to renegotiate the price. They want more money for their land. So it's not so much that the farmers are completely innocent, they're just protecting their land. No, they're looking to sell their land, but they're looking for a better price for the land. And the farmers are led by Tatsuemon Kanamura, who is played by Kichijiro Ueda. And I just find that drama very interesting, or at the very least, not so black and white. And there's some nuance to it, with the farmers who have, always been poor. They want a chance to be rich, and they feel like protesting to the point where they're guaranteed a higher price, you know, that's interesting. And then you got the workers who, again, you feel bad for because they got no choice in the matter as you know, they're being treated poorly by the farmers, but they're also getting harassed by the higher ups in the corporate sector to get this expressway done. So you feel bad for them, and it also gets worse as the monsters start to rampage. You know, which I'll get into in a little bit, but I just want to say, like, The farmers just treat a lot of the workers poorly. They won't sell the farmers food or milk. I'm sorry, the farmers won't sell the workers, food or milk. And then what makes it worse is that when the giant monster, happens, there's the workers are still forced to work, even though, hey, giant monsters, they're rampaging. I mean, a lot of the workers do leave, but the foreman has to stay because he's the boss. And I think the two workers that stay with foreman Shiro Tsutsumi is it's been I'm not recording this right away, so I'm hoping I got the cast right for this one. It's a good chance I didn't, but it's Mine no Tetsu, played by Taro Marui, and Hachiko, who's played by Yukitaro Hotaru. Again, I might be wrong with the cast. It's completely possible, but I feel like I'm right. But let me know in the comments if I am horribly, horribly wrong. So, anyways, as we get and I feel like the two, workers who stay with the foreman, they're kind of sort of a comedic relief. But again, you still feel bad for them because they're just being treated poorly regardless and have to deal with the monster stuff. But yeah, and I mentioned this briefly, but another thing that's great about the story is that we really get to see how giant monsters rampaging affect the common folk. Granted, this isn't the first movie that's done this. We've gotten plenty examples of like Gamera, not Gamera, Godzilla Raids Again, and Rodan. So we have examples of that, but and the Gamera movies, or at least the previous two, because the first one, yeah, well, we got the common folk with Toshio and his family, but it was mostly focused on the professor, who discovered Gamera in the military. And for Gamera versus Barugan, it was again, they weren't so, common, folk, as the main cast. They were, because they were the ones that instigated, the kaiju happening. It's not like it's like a small cast of, characters, you know, that regains this perspective of, for, and while there were like, for the last movie, there was an instance where we got to see a lot of people hiding in the shelter or in the subways or whatever from Barugan's rampage or whatever. And we got some brief snippets of, workers in the beginning of Gamera versus Barugan, reacting to Gamera's descent on the dam. It's like those little moments, but it's not something that happens throughout the entire movie. But here, it's different because you get a community of people, or you get some workers. You really get to see how, for these community, this farmer community, how Gyaos, in particular, has affected their well-being and their chances of selling the expressway. Because what happens is that the farmers actually, deviate from their leader Tatsuman, Tatsuemon, and because they're like, no, we're tired, we're scared of the monster, we want to sell our land, but guess what? Because they've listened to Tatsuemon and waited, and Gauss has been like rampaging a lot. The foreman actually says, we don't know if we're gonna be going through that way. We might just go around. So the rest of the farmers feel, really butthurt from, having weight and possibly missing out on the already established deal, and now they're screwed. So and that's like just a common thing we see throughout the entire movie. And for the last part of this, point, that I want to mention with the human element is that we are back to having a kid in the main cast. We missed it out in the last movie, Gamera for Spurgun. It was zero kids, adults only. We got our child protagonist, who is Eiichi Kanamura, who is the grandson of Tatsuemon, and Eiichi is played by Naoyuki. Na, I'm sorry, Nao, Naoyuki Abe, and I gotta say, this kid so much of an improvement over Toshio because Eiichi at least feels like a kid. And there are moments where he's like, "Ooh, I want to see the monster action," but he also is like, "Oh no, never mind. I'm scared. No, now I'm scared." He gets scared. Uh, in the beginning of the movie, he does. It's like, "Hey, let's go to this cave." But as soon as danger happens, he wants to run away, but gets trapped, and the adult that you know, like so to give some context, in the beginning of the movie, there's this reporter who wants to have the first scoop, and he bumps into Aichi, who is guarding this trail for the farmers to use to, pretty much go and vandalize the construction workers' work site. But the reporter, he doesn't necessarily trick; he more so persuades Aichi to be a guide and to go find Gamera. He pretty much is like, "Hey, we'll find Gamera, buddy. Yeah, let's go." Little shithead. Oh, but no. Yeah. Anyway, so in the movie, He, tells the reporter, "Hey, let's go in this cave," but then they accidentally stumble upon Gyaos, but the reporter leaves Aichi behind, and Aichi's like, "Hey, help me." And he's not like Toshio, where Toshio's like, "I want to go see Gamera, yeah, going headfirst into danger, I'm gonna die." Aichi's like, "No, I don't want to die. No. Get me out of here, get me out of here. Okay, you're abandoning me, cool." And it's at this point where we get to see Gamera actually protect Aichi. And Gamera even gives Aichi a ride. But other than that, Aichi has actually help the human cast instead of trying to like, "No, please don't hurt Gamera," or root for the humans to fail. Like, yeah, the humans have failed. Go Gamera. No, Ichi's like, actually, like, first of all, he's the one that names Gyaos because that's how Gyaos sounds. He makes a Gyaos noise. How do you make a Gyaos noise? Gyaos. I don't know. It works better in the movie. Gauss sounds a lot better than my very poor uh, in- imitation of that roar. But not only that, Aichi also, actually helps, with the plans to defeat Gauss, as he's, in the like he's involved with the human cast and the scientists and all that, trying to stop, you know, Gauss, particularly because Gauss is the main threat of this movie. Um, like there's a scene where they're like, "Oh, we gotta try to," like, where a lot of the scientists and adults are like, "We could, potentially get Gauss to you know, stay somewhere. If we could do that, to stay somewhere long enough for the sun to come up and pretty much kill him, because Gauss does not like the sunlight. Sunlight kind of kills him. The UV rays, it shows in the movie that because with a fight with his Gamera, Gauss loses part of his foot, and we see the foot wash up, but the foot itself shrinks with UV rays. And they're like, if we can get Gauss to stay long enough where he'll be too hurt from the sun, we'll have a chance to kill him. And they were like wondering, well, how are we going to do that? What we need thing big enough for to hold Gyaos to get him dizzy and to stay there, And the kid's like, "Hey, there's this building right there that can do it." So Ichi helps in that way. And then finally, for the big conflict, Ichi was the one to come up with the idea of create a forest fire to attract Gamera and have Gamera fight Gyaos. And Ichi was the one to make up that idea, and the grandfather actually goes to the scientist to be like, "Hey, do that. Yeah, no, that's like my grandson came up with this idea. And it's actually a good idea. And what other choice do we have? We tried everything else." And that was also a moment where the grandfather was making amends for, you know, his greediness because, he put himself, his family, and the rest of the villagers, in this situation because because of his greed and the greed of the farmers as well. So he's like making amends by like helping to fight Gauss and actually owning up, like, yeah, no, I was an idiot, but now I'm learning my lesson. So again, Ichi, MVP of this movie. So after that, my next point for the I likes is that Gauss himself. Gauss is awesome. He is iconic. And he has a very solid build up to his first, full appearance. Like in terms of Barugan in the last movie, I didn't touch upon this, but now that I'm thinking about it, Barugan didn't have too much of a build up. He didn't like yeah, there wasn't so much of a build up like until it had because the thing is it's like in the previous movie, the human cast are like, Opal, yep, the Opal, we got the Opal. Then it was later they found out the Opal was actually an egg, and that's where the buildup for Barugun happens. Here, though, at the beginning of the movie, volcano erupts, and it attracts Gamera. But what happens then is that, you know, we get to see news, reporters cover, this research helicopter that's going to go to the volcano to explore, you know, the volcano to research Gamera to see like what's Gamera up to, because at this point in the Gamera series, Gamera is still on iffy terms with humanity. Humanity's still not sure about Gamera. They're like, oh, we gotta keep an eye on him. So as the helicopter, you know, is going, to the volcano, right by the volcano, there's a kind of like a smaller volcano-ish, mountain that's producing a green light, and through that tunnel we hear Gauss's roar. I believe, I'm not sure about the roar, but I'm pretty sure we hear Gauss's roar, and then we see Gauss shooting his iconic, beam, you know, like supersonic, beam that cuts things in half. Like it's not a regular beam. Like something that's really cool about Gas is that his beam isn't like, oh, it's gonna like cause a big explosion. No, it slices things in half, like Goemon's sword and the Lupin show, where it's just perfectly sliced. That's what his beam does, and that's what happens. Gauss, beam hits the helicopter right in the middle. Helicopter splits up and then explodes. With the collision itself. So we got this like, oh, what happened here? And then we get the reporter that I mentioned earlier that tricks Ichi to, you know, try to get him to scoop to see what happened. But, they stumble upon Gauss, and the reporter actually gets eaten by Gauss. And even though we see the reporter getting lifted up and we have like little clips of, Gauss, it's like very close up shots of Gauss. We never get a full appearance of Gauss, but we do get, enough detail like, oh, this is big monster, just ate a human, not cool. And then it's only a little bit after that when You know, we see Gyaos emerge from his cave, you know, and he's just his head bobs up and down through the tree, and it's a great build up to his first full appearance. Gauss design, I also really love it. It's again very iconic. You know, being very bat-like. It's like a bat combined with pterodactyl. It's has semblance of Rodan. Gauss also has this like iconic triangle flat head. You know, he's a really cool villain. And again, you know, the whole vampire inspiration for Gauss, I think greatly benefits, you know, why, you know, to this kaiju's overall theme and design and whatever, and is why Gauss has stayed so iconic with Gamera. Like that's the one kaiju that has constantly reappeared throughout the series. You know, like Gauss has one, he has cool powers, he has this cool vampire motif. You know, I mentioned earlier that Gauss can't be in the sun. Uh, so yeah, it's just Gauss is a really cool monster. So I'm gonna end that point with Gauss there. So we're on to my next point, and is that Gamera. Gamera himself is handled much better in this movie, and it's definitely starts to solidify his friend to all children hero status. Like this is a transition movie. And what I mean about Gamera being handled this movie better is that in the previous movie, Gamera appears three times. One in the beginning, one in the middle, and one time at the end. It's, you know, that was how Gamera was handled in that movie, and it really made it feel like Gamera got sidelined in this movie. But here, Gamera appears multiple times throughout the movie, is constantly talked about. You know, along with Gauss, there's a better balance between both Gauss and Gamera. You know, because you know there's still this, you know, like sense of is Gamera good, you know, evil. Gamera might be our only hope. You know, we see multiple encounters. You know, I guess I'm combining 2 points in one. I just realized this looking at my notes. But yeah, I just want to mention that yeah, Gamera is this is definitely a Gamera movie. Gamera doesn't get sidelined for Gauss. Gamera is in the forefront. You know, we see, you know, characters talking about Gamera. So it's just great to see. So, and I mentioned this before, but this is my next point, and that is that fights are improved, and there's more of them, and it gives a better balance between the two kaiju. So yeah, one of the criticisms I had is that yeah, with the last movie, Gamera was handled poorly, and the fights could have used some improvement. They felt a little slow paced, and they weren't short. You know, and they fell a bit short. Here, though, these fights, like it makes so we get such a variety of fights here because we get Gamera fighting Gauss on land. We get Gamera and Gauss fighting in the air. We get Gamera trying to pull Gauss into the ocean and all that. We see the two injure each other. They're really good fights, and we see some like clever fighting tactics from Gamera, like using his shell to roll down a hill to hit Gauss, and they're like very creative. They're better paced, and there is more of them, and we get to see that this is definitely a bigger battle between the two. Oh, and they're more memorable, definitely for sure than Brogun. So I think the and like I mentioned before, there is a better balance between the two kaiju. Oh, like you know, we get some moments of Gauss by himself, you know, to establish him being a threat. We had little moments at the beginning of Gamera by himself, and they're like sparse moments, like in the movie. I will say that you know there isn't too many moments of Gamera by himself, but there's sparse moments like in the beginning, and there was one after the first battle of you know with Gauss, you know, because in the movie Gamera gets injured by Gauss's beam, and we actually see Gamera bleed. So we see Gamera resting in the ocean, healing himself. So that was cool. And yeah, and the fights again is just they're better, and there's more variety, and there's not too much that you can ask for. I And to my final point of my likes is that I gotta mention this. The music, I really like this. The music here, and the reason I'm mentioning it, I have to mention it here. I almost was going to talk about the tokusatsu effect, but doing just a little bit more research, I realized this is the composer's last Gamera movie, and I really want to mention that. So I'm going to do a little search on the IMDb, and we're going to find that the music is by Tadashi Yamauchi, who did the music for the first Gamera movie. He did not do the music for Barugan, but he did do the music for Daikaiju Gamera. And the reason I gotta say I like the music is because I really like his theme for Gamera in these, at least these two movies. It's very foreboding, and because it's the da 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 da. It's very, there's some sort of iconicness to them that makes, that it feels very much like, oh yeah, Gamera was this big guy, and it also feels somewhat heroic too, even though kind of foreboding. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that the composer did a really good job with these first, like for Gamera and Gamera vs. Gyaos. And it is going to be a real shame to not see his work in future Showa era Gamera movies. But I just want to give him credit that yeah, I really enjoyed his work and those two Gamera movies, and especially his theme or motif for Gamera himself. But with all the likes said and done, I gotta get into some of my dislikes, some criticisms, but mostly nitpicks because I honestly had trouble really putting 5 dislikes on this movie. Uh, so the first one is this is very much a nitpick, but it's more of a like in the first battle, Gamera goes to save Aichi, and there's just some like circumstances of like, wait, Gamera, you're moving your arms way too much. Ichi probably fell off a bit. Or most importantly, Gamera, how on earth did you reach the back of your shell to put Ichi on? I'm trying to figure out. Your arms do not have that much mobility where you can reach behind, your shell. It's very much very weird. It breaks the laws of physics and just anatomy. Yeah, I just don't get it. As you can probably tell from the tone of my voice, that was definitely a nitpick and not something I have a real issue with. I just needed a filler spot. Cut me some slack. Sometimes it's hard to find 5 things I dislike about a movie. But this one, it's still probably in the nitpick, but it's definitely like something that can be a criticism, and that is the suits themselves. They sometimes look a bit too stiff or lifeless during action scenes, or there's just some moments where they're kind of just standing still, like how I mentioned Gyaos, is getting injured by Gamera. Yeah, no, like Gamera's getting injured by Gyaos by the beam, and the beam's cutting Gamera's arm. Well, the thing is, they're not really moving too much when that's happening, and Gamera's kind of letting it happen. So yeah, there's some stiffness in these fights, but it's not so bad where I still think the fights are better, but it's still like something to notice where it's like, yeah, there's some moments where they just look a bit too stiff or um, lifeless. This next point, again, it's It's just one of those like nitpicks, but it's something that maybe could have helped the movie a bit because the movie is hour and 27 minutes, which isn't bad and is shorter than the previous movie, but it does feel that there's just like one too many failed attempts to fight Gyaos, and I feel like one of them could have been cut. I don't know which one I would have cut particularly because they are entertaining, but it might have helped the movie flow a bit faster or feel a bit tighter if they just cut one of those sequences out. It could have benefited from the movie if it was, just it tightened it up a bit. This next point is just like it feels more like the first point, and is that it's more of the question of why is Eiichi the only kid in the movie? It is kind of weird that he is like the only kid we see in the village or these group of farmers. It's like, wait, does everybody else not have kids? Do you guys not have kids? But seriously, it's just like, especially since I watched the trailer beforehand and we see Aichi cheering on Gamera with a couple other kids, and it's just one of those like questions of like, where are the other kids? Is Aichi the only kid in this village? What's going on? It just kind of feels weird to have only one kid in the movie. I wasn't expecting like a big cast of kids or to have more kids, show up throughout the entire movie, but just have a sense where it's like make it so Ichi doesn't feel like he's the only kid in Japan. Just saying. And then finally, this is the last point. It's very much a nitpick, and I don't have an issue with the song itself, but I just want to say the Gamera song at the end is not the iconic one. It's not the good one. We gotta wait one more movie until we get to the good Gamera song, the catchy one, the the beautiful, infamous, but very beloved Gamera song we all know and love, and the Gamera song that I find to be really neat. So yeah, as you can probably tell with my dislikes and criticisms, I don't really have any. So we're gonna go and end things off with my overall thoughts. So yeah, this is one of my favorite Gamera movies when I was a kid, and it's still entertaining to this day. I still really love it, and it's probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite from the Showa era. This movie is an overall improvement from the first two Gamera movies, and I really like to see that sense of improvement. That's one thing I'm like enjoying watching these movies, or at least these first three, because I will say I started watching, you know, going forward. I know the movies going forward. These are all rewatches for me, so the improvement kind of does stop here. But at least for these first three, it was nice to see the movies just constant improvement from one another. And that's it. This movie kind of really cements the foundation for Gamera movies going forward. With this is like the pretty much just what's going to happen is that yep, these are going to be kids movies, or at least kids are going to be a big part of the movie. Gamera's going to be a hero. This is the one that says okay, this is what Gamera's transitioning into. This is what Gamera's going to go, going to be moving forward. Gyaos is a fantastic villain, and it's great to see Gamera make the shift to being a full-on hero kaiju in this movie. And seeing the two duke out was really great. And I recommend this for anyone who wants to get into the early Gamera movies to watch this one. If I had to choose one show era Gamera movie, you know, for them to watch, that isn't so bad it's good, but one that I genuinely feel, yeah, this is actually pretty good, it would be this movie. And yep, so there you have it. We're at the end of the podcast episode. Woohoo! Yeah. Next week, we're going to be taking a look at the next movie in the franchise, which is Gamera versus Virus. And I got to also mention thank you so much for listening to the end of the episode. If you are listening to this through YouTube, make sure you press subscribe, press the like button, dislike, comment. This podcast is also available on iTunes, it's not iTunes, but Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean.com, and Podcast Addict, and maybe more to come. That'll be it for this episode. Once again, I appreciate you for listening this far, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Take care.